Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be mounting my clutch and pressure plate assembly on the back of the motor, and then the bell housing with the throwout bearing yoke and everything in it. So the first thing you want to do is you don't want to get a lot of oil around your clutch area, because if you get oil on there, it's going to cause it to start slipping and burn up your clutch and stuff. So they're real picky about not putting too much oil on there. I've got the solid pilot bearing. It's like a centered metal, so it's kind of like almost like an oil light bushing, so it's self-lubricating. But they say go ahead and put just a drop or two oil on it to start with. So I just take a little Q-tip like this, put a couple drops of oil on it, and I just kind of run it around the inside of it like that. It kind of cleans it out a little bit. You can see the dirt on there. Plus it lubricates that bearing just a little bit. The next thing you want to do is take just some brake cleaner and clean your clutch surface areas where they engage on that. And then this is my new flex plate down here, so I'm just going to rinse it off really good. Try to get any oils or anything off that surface. I already did my pressure plate the other day, but I'm just doing it again just to make sure I didn't touch it with my hands or something. And I'll probably do this a couple of times, because on the pressure plate they do put a preservative on it to keep it from rusting while it's in storage. And you know, always try to wear rubber gloves if you can, and don't touch, if you can't, don't touch this surface or the mating surface on the flywheel where that clutch has to run. Okay, I got that good and clean. I'm just going to let that air dry for a little bit. I've got the clutch over here, and it comes sealed up really good, so there shouldn't be any oil on it. Just be real careful when you unwrap it. Make sure you don't have any oil on your gloves or your hands. Try not to touch these surfaces if you can. And then if you look on here, if you can see it here, I'll try to get the light from shining on it. But right here it says flywheel side. So you want to make sure when you put it on there that you put this side towards the flywheel, the other side goes against the pressure plate. There's a alignment tool. You put it through the clutch plate into the pilot bearing and the crank, and then when you bolt the pressure plate on there, it's going to be under tension, because of course it's released like your foot's off the clutch. So you want this centered as true as possible, so when you go to slide the transmission onto the bell housing, it'll go through here into the pilot bearing without binding or anything. It also comes with a brand new throwout bearing, and you can see they pre-lube it a little bit. You don't need much lube in there. Again, you don't want much inside where this clutch area is, because you don't want any grease getting on your clutch surface. And that's actually probably more than I need. I might smear it around a little bit. It's supposed to, you can see that groove down in there. You're supposed to fill that groove, and they kind of did. You can kind of see on that side they filled the groove. I got some light in there, but over here they kind of got sloppy with it, you know, factory. It's just got a big old goob of grease in there, so I'm going to try to push it down into that groove where there's no grease in that groove yet, and then kind of wipe these surfaces off just because they got the protectant on them. And then on your transmission they give you this spline lubricant you're supposed to put on the transmission shaft, the output shaft or the input shaft, and then wipe it back off again. You don't want to leave a lot of grease on there, just enough to kind of lubricate these splines, because you got to understand these splines aren't like sliding back and forth. You know, even though your shaft, you know, even your splines are this long on the shaft, your clutch plate isn't sliding back and forth on this. It's sitting pretty well stationary, and then when you push in on the clutch, whatever clearance that gets between the pressure plate, the clutch plate, and the flywheel is all this clutch plate can move. It's really not supposed to be going back and forth a whole lot on here. So you don't need a lot of lubricant, just something to kind of keep it from you know, galding up or sticking a little bit. But you know, and then this is where that throwout bearing rides, and the lubricant's in it, so it'll slick this up. And this is outside the area where the clutch and the pressure plate is, so this grease, even if it slings off there, should go into the bell housing, shouldn't go into the clutch. But again, you don't want any contamination getting on that clutch if you can help it. So let's get the clutch plate and pressure plate mounted on the flywheel, and then we will install the bell housing. Okay, I've got this engine just hanging on my A-frame, so it's kind of floating around. It's not the most ideal situation when you're trying to do something like this, but it's the best I can do right now. So what I'm going to do first is, let me get the camera there, I keep bumping it. I'm going to cut this protective plastic off of the clutch plate. And again, you want to be real careful. I made sure my gloves are good and clean and not oily or anything. And I'm trying not to touch those clutch surfaces if I can help it. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to slide this through. This is showing here. I'm going to slide my pilot lineup tool through like that. And then again, make sure this says flywheel side. So this side here goes against the flywheel. So what I'm going to do is slide that in the pilot bearing and shove it on up in there like that. Shove it all the way in so it keeps it as true with the center line of that crankshaft as you can. Now this is a little bit tricky trying to do it by yourself, especially with this hanging on an A-frame that wants to move around. Ideally you'd want to have this positioned where it can't move so you're not chasing it around. So what I'm going to have to do first is I'm going to go ahead and drop one bolt, and I'm going to come over to this side right here and get this bolt started. Now, I'm not putting any kind of Loctite or anything on these bolts because they have lock washers, and they get torqued to 35 foot-pounds. So they're not super tight, but tight enough. Okay. And then, because basically I'm going to have to compress these fingers as I tighten these bolts down, because it's like having your foot off the clutch. So the clutch is engaged, so it's gripping that pad, which means it's under pressure. So I'm going to have to pull it in with the bolts once I get all the bolts started in it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and forth just like you would any bolt pattern when you're going to torque it down. I'm going to kind of try to slowly bring it in a little at a time, because I'm compressing these fingers as I'm doing this, because again, it's just like your foot is off the clutch and the clutch is engaged to make the car move. That's what you do. You go ahead and tighten these down to 35 foot-pounds, and then you pull this out once it's clamped on there, because this is holding that clutch plate in place. So I'll go ahead and torque these down, and then we will put the bell housing on. Okay, I'm going to go around one time and torque them to 25 foot-pounds, and I'll go back and torque them at 35. That's what they have to end up at. Okay, I'm going to set this to 35 then. There's 35. So I'm going to go back and do it one time without the extension, because in theory that extension could be flexing a little bit and giving us a little bit of a false reading. So I'm just going to go back with just a socket now. Okay. And you can see we can pull this out now, because that clutch plate will stay in place now. It's held in with the pressure plate. I'll get the bell housing over here and we'll get it lined up and bolted up. Okay, so I already put I've had the bell housing on and I dialed it in so it runs within less than 5 thousandths either way with the center line of the crank. So now I just have to put it on, and I put blue Loctite on these bolts. They get tightened to 25 foot-pounds. Let's see. I've got this shift yoke in here that's hitting. I gotta get it. Oh, there we go. I gotta put it up on the little ball that's in there. It's got two little fingers. I don't know if you can see it down in there. There's two little fingers right here that go down on the shank on the ball in there that thing pivots on once it's in position. So I just got to get it lined up. There it goes. Okay, and then there's two dowels on the back of the motor. Hope you can see the dowel. There's a dowel here and there's a dowel over here. You spin it around. You can see the dowel here and a dowel here, and then there's holes in the bell housing. That's what lines this bell housing up with the motor. On there like that. I think this bolt right here, when I get it in the car, I think there's a ground wire that has to come onto that, plus a strap that holds the wires for the starter, I believe, go in there too. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this in and torque it down just in case I don't need to take it out, but I'm pretty sure that one comes out. And that's it. Next I'll get ready and we'll slide the transmission in here. That pilot area you've seen on the input shaft, the transmission will go through the throwout bearing, and then the splined area will go into the clutch plate that's being held in there centered. You can kind of see, I can move this around a little bit, but it's held by this rubber boot. So let me get set up for that and we'll do that next. Okay, I've got this set up on this rolling cart. It's gonna be easier because I got this hanging up here on the A-frame. Okay, so now we're gonna mate the transmission up to the bell housing. There it goes. Okay. It's kind of a snug fit on this hub going into the transmission, so I'm gonna get the bolt started in here just to keep it from popping back out. And then we should be able to bump that in there with like a rubber hammer or something. Hub. That's a brand new hub. And these are 1/2-inch bolts. I don't know what the torque spec's supposed to be for them, but for a 1/2-inch bolt going into cast iron, a grade 5 bolt, the torque would be 75 foot-pounds. I am not going to torque this to 75 foot-pounds. I'm going to just draw it down with the ratchet and call it good. If I wiggle it, I can actually wiggle it on in there. So that completes the clutch, bell housing, and transmission installation onto the back of the motor. On the next video, I'll be actually setting the motor in the car. There's one thing I want to double check on. This car was an automatic transmission car, so it didn't have this support bracket here for the clutch lever. This goes onto the frame of the car, this goes onto the block on the motor, and your clutch pedal rod goes in here, and the rod goes from here back to the fork on the transmission, and that's what disengages the clutch when you push in on your pedal. And I thought I had it figured out where I had to weld a bracket on for this. It didn't have one on it because it was an automatic. So I thought I had it figured out where I welded on there, but after it was in the car, it looked like it was sitting crooked, like this bracket was sitting back further towards the back of the car by about 1 inch. So I made up another bracket, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the motor and I'm going to put this in there and put it in place, and I'm going to line it up where it needs to be and see how far off I am. I might have to just weld this bracket in next to that bracket that's already in there. But it seemed to work okay before, but it did, this rod, because it was crooked, it would rub going through the firewall. So I'm hoping that that will correct it once I weld this in the right place. So I want to check that when I get it put in. We'll see. So there we've got the transmission mated to the bell housing mated to the engine, the pressure plate and clutch put in place in here. I got the throwout bearing fork here. So we're ready to go into the car tomorrow. I'm going to start setting it in place. So this is all the further we're going to go tonight. Appreciate you guys watching. Have a great day, and we will see you on the next video.